If they don't fit, if they don't feel good when you put them on the first time, they never
If it
will.
don't fit, you must have quit. Oh wait, that's a different thing.
Yeah. If the shoe fits.
All right, so we are on Matthew chapter 24. If anyone wants to read the book of Revelation, you should read Matthew chapter 24 first. Why? Because this is how we interpret the Bible, right? The clearer passages interpret the less clear ones, right? So that means that rather than trying to figure out what all these beasts and everything else is, you should probably go read what Jesus very plainly and clearly says. And this is right before, right? I think this is like the Wednesday before his crucifixion. Okay? All right. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to show him the building of the temple. Okay? So, King Herod, the first King Herod, the one who tried to murder Jesus, started the construction of this new temple. And it was a work that had been going on for 46 years. Okay? They've been building the temple for a long time. Herod died, and the building was continued by, different, like governors and the like, right? And so it was a very magnificent place. Huge complex, very beautiful. Herod, of course, was even though he was a tyrant and a really evil person, he was really good at building things. He was quite an architect. And he put a lot of money towards towards these great building projects. Okay? And so the temple is this massive complex. It's beautiful, right? And it awes people who come to see it. In fact, the only part of the temple that's left right now is one wall to the outer court, and that is what the Jews call the Wailing Wall. That's the only part of the temple, and it's not even part of the temple, right? It's like an outside wall. Okay? So the disciples are awed by this, right? By all this money, by all this gold, by all this power. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. This happens in AD 70 when Vespasian, the Roman general, is marching his army to put down the rebellion of the Jews. The Jews rebel against the Romans. Vespasian goes to put an end to this, but Vespasian is called back. And this is what is called the War of the Four Emperors. Okay? Because Nero is killed by his own guards, and then you have this sort of civil war that happens around this time. Vespasian goes back in order to clinch his victory, right? He comes out on top, and I believe it's his son, Titus, who leads the armies of Rome to Jerusalem. And they end up burning the city and destroying it completely. And there's actually a triumph of it in Rome, where you can actually see them carrying off the treasures of the temple. Now, why do you think these stones will be torn apart?
When they burned it, it melted the gold, and the gold fell in through all the cracks, and they had to dig it out.
Right, because when you were a soldier, you didn't get paid too terrible good. So, what did you get paid for? Pillaging, right? That was your finder's fee, right? You could call it like headhunting, right? Your bonus, right? Well, when the temple is full of gold and all these sort of things, right? It makes sense, right? Because you don't want that to go to waste. So what do? You tear the stones apart and take the gold, right? And so when it says here, there shall not be left here one stone upon another, I mean, that is literally true. Because they tore it all apart in order to get to the gold and the jewels and all that stuff that had melted during this really hot fire. Okay? So Jesus leaves the temple and he goes to the Mount of Olives. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? So here they ask him very clearly, okay, what's going to happen? Tell us the future. And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. So, the first thing here is a warning. Okay? You need to be on guard. You need to be vigilant. Why? For many shall come in my name, saying, I am Christ, and shall deceive many. So that is the first sign of the end of the world. There will be many who claim to be Christ. Okay? This happened a lot. Bar Korba in, it was like AD 120. You have a Jewish Messiah by the name of Sabati Sevi in the 1600s. And in the 20th century, you've had at least 23 different claimants of messiahs. Those who claim to be Jesus reincarnated or whatever. Okay? There have been many people who have claimed to be the Christ. I mean, and obviously the one that probably really sticks out to you is right, the guy in Waco, Texas. Now that
How about Jones?
Jones, not so much. He's a false prophet. Okay, but the guy in Waco, Texas, was David Koresh, right? He actually claimed to be the Messiah, right? Jim Jones was actually a communist, and he used religion to found his commune, right? Now, it led to a lot of death because, you know, it's where we get the thing, drink the Kool-Aid, right? So that's the thing is that, so, in terms of signs for the end of the world, right, check. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye not be troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Have there been wars and rumors of wars? Yeah. Well, what does Jesus tell you?
That's not the end.
Right? He says, don't be troubled. Right? So, how many people were troubled by the whole Iran thing? A lot of people, right? Oh, World War III, blah, 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 right? And it's like, look, the United States has troops is doing military actions in at least 7 countries, right? I mean, that's the thing, is that, and that's just our country. That's not even like, you know. So that's the thing. It's like, the end is not yet, right? And to get so worked up about this is actually to go against what Jesus says. Jesus says, don't be troubled. Now, we should pray that war doesn't happen, right? We should pray for peace. And we should hold our own country responsible. Because I argue that most of these conflicts since World War II have been illegal. They have not been just wars because they have not been declared by Congress.
Nor have they been fought to win.
No, they've been not fought to win, right? A lot of them have not been defensive wars, right? But they've been wars to protect our own interests, right? They do not fit the categories of what a just war is, right? And so we need to keep our politicians in line here too, right? That, you know, there are a lot of war hawks out there, right? So, all right. 7. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes in diverse places. That's pretty, I'm sure you can name a bunch of these off the top of your head, right? Pestilences, just look at the Black Death, or in the 20th century, Spanish influenza. It doesn't take long to start, looking at these things. So, check. But Jesus says, all these are the beginning of sorrows. Right? This is just the beginning. Okay? So, these are like the contractions that happen before a kid is born. And when can you start having contractions?
Towards the end.
Long time before the baby is born, right? All right. 9. Then shall they deliver you up to be afflicted, and shall kill you, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my sake. My name's sake. Well, this is about the persecution of the church, right? It doesn't take you long to see this, right? In fact, on the podcast, we Pastor Bullhagen interviewed Bishop Litkin from the Siberian Lutheran Church. And he talks about how the church was basically obliterated. They killed the last Lutheran pastor. And he died in 1936. They tore down their churches and used the materials to build like statues to communism. They reused churches as like storage depots, right? They took all the people who were Lutheran and they sent them to gulags, okay? And that's just in the Soviet Union, right? That's not the beheadings that have happened in Syria, the great persecution that is happening in Sudan against Christians, the great persecution that's happening in Iraq against Christians. So that's the thing, is that this is happening all over the world, okay? So
we haven't gotten to the point where we kill them yet, but Christians are persecuted in this country too.
right,
They're basically told to shut up and stay out of the public eye.
right.
Keep your opinion to yourself, and the fact that you're a Christian makes you ineligible to hold public office or do anything else, basically, in the public sphere.
Yeah, it is amazing how even that has come out in the last election cycle, how Christians shouldn't even run for office. And we shouldn't be surprised. We all act surprised when these things happen. But Jesus told us all these things would happen,
And
right?
how many church groups have gotten out of the business? They won't do adoptions anymore because they won't place them with gay couples. They don't do a lot of things that they used to. A lot of them, they've sold off their hospitals because they're forced to perform abortions, and they won't do it. So it's happening here too.
Yeah, I can't
They haven't gotten to
remember.
the point of actually locking us up and killing us yet, but there is persecution.
Right, and that's the thing is like, what was the Roman Catholic group in Illinois that basically was run out of business because that state is so godless? So that's the thing. It's like, it's, yeah. This isn't, like, and it's uncomfortable for you guys because a lot of you didn't grow up with this. You grew up assuming some sort of Christendom. And that is not the case. This is not going to be, and that's why we ought to, Jesus is telling us this in order to prepare us, right? And we ought to be prepared so that way these things don't take us by surprise. Because even if you don't suffer some of these things, let's just be honest. You 60-year-olds will. Before I'm done preaching and teaching, it'll be interesting to see what, what it's going to be like. So that's the thing. We should prepare not only ourselves, but also our kids and our grandkids because, it's even like I said in the sermon today. you look at Generation Z and how few of them are actually Christians and the enormous social pressure they're going to undergo. That's why we have to do it we need to be even better about educating our kids now in the Christian faith, because they are going to go out into a society that is really doesn't know anything about Christianity. All that's going away.
And everyone they encounter in public school, in college, and in the world is going to tell them that everything we've told them is wrong. So if they don't have a good foundation and know how to support what they believe, they're going to just get swept away.
Yeah, and I think in the next generation or two, you won't see just that vitriolic hatred against Christianity. It's kind of like in Germany. When I was in Germany, we would meet people on the street and we would start talking to them about, why we were there, as Americans and stuff. And we told them, why we were there. And, they had never heard anything about Christianity. They didn't know anything about anything. And that's the point it's going to get to here, right? I mean, the way that the demographics, that's the thing. The way it's moving, we should be preparing for, because, like I said, we need more preaching and not less.
That's why parochial schools, I think, I never want to give up my education in parochial school, but I think they're like 100 times more necessary for my grandchildren than they were for me. I would have probably ended up okay, strong in faith in church.
Yeah.
I would never want to give it up. I don't mean that. But for them, oh, my stars.
Yeah.
I just see the value of it so much all the time. And like having one set where the mother teaches, 8th grade in her public school. I think she really sees, because it's hard to understand when you don't grow up in it.
Right.
And it's different. It's different than, you went to public school, your public school was good, you know what I mean, and stuff.
Now they have drag queen story hour in
Oh,
preschool.
it drives me nuts, yeah.
Yeah, that's the world. The world is deliberately targeting and deliberately indoctrinating.
They're good at it.
And they're very good at it. They are way better at it than we are.
Yeah.
Way better at it.
Yes.
They use, you look on Netflix, you can't even find a TV show that doesn't have a gay couple in it now.
Can't on regular TV either.
It is just, it's just like, it is, yeah.
Even commercials.
Yeah.
The show you're
Especially the
watching is
last year.
perfectly fine.
Yeah.
The commercial comes on, you're like, say what?
And that's a population, what is it, 2% or, I don't know, I just read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very low.
It's not a lot.
It's
Well,
very
and-
low.
Make
It's
you
not
think it's
like there's a gay
25%
person
at
in every
least.
building, no.
And Pastor Rieger, he did his PhD on, he wrote a book. It's a great book. You guys should get it if you can, called Sex in a Christless World. He has done a bunch of research on what it was like in the Roman time during, and then, of course, compares it to today. And,
Very similar.
it's very similar.
And look what happened to Rome.
Right, and that's the thing. His argument is that we've been living in a bubble for about 200 years, and now the bubble is popping, and we're going back to the way that we're actually going back to a sort of normalcy, and that normalcy is going to be really tough for the church. It's a fight. That's why they call it the church militant, because we have to contend for the faith. And I do agree. I think every congregation should seek to start up some sort of parochial education. I don't think it can look like what we do here, but there has to be some,
You grew up with a Wednesday school, for example. You didn't have a parochial school.
Right.
But you still had classes in the church for all your parishioners' families.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and I think too with the rise of homeschooling, for example, I think there are ways. I mean, circuits could call teachers. Teachers could be circuit riders among these different congregations. Or there could be like a homeschooling co-op, you know. So I think we got to get creative in how we do these things because
First, you have to convince parents.
that's the big
the
one.
main problem.
That's the big
So many
Parents
parents
can't
just
homeschool.
don't understand until it's
No,
too
some
late,
parents
until they're
can't.
10 and 11-year-olds saying, well, I don't believe any of that stuff because my teachers in school told me this. They don't realize how they are being indoctrinated, and they start when they're little.
Right.
They don't wait until they're in high school to indoctrinate them. They're starting in
Oh, no, they
preschool.
start- My granddaughter came home with, with politics. That this politician was so much better than the other one, and her father's like, oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're stopping that right now.
Well, and that's the big problem.
That's great.
Well, and the most harmful message that the public schools teach children is, there may or may not be a God, but it doesn't matter because he doesn't have anything to do with your life. You know,
Yep.
you want to believe in God, fine, but it doesn't have anything to do with science or history or math or, what career you're going to pursue or how you live your daily life. God has nothing to do with that. And they live in an environment where that's true. In
Right.
the public school, God is doesn't have anything to do with what they're doing there.
And that's why this is
it's
so
hard to
very
counter
hard.
that with an hour on Sunday morning.
Because a lot of people think back to their own public school education and they're like, well, it wasn't so bad, right?
But it's different.
But it is so different. I mean, I look at what it was like for me. I was arguing with the teacher about evolution in second grade. Okay? But that's the thing is like, and it's gotten so much worse. Like, second graders should not be exposed to evil. When their minds are so plastic, when they're just receiving everything and they receive something bad,
But
how
the
hard?
basic problem is, you can say whatever you want about any school, they're exposed to this evil in their daily life.
Yeah.
You know,
And-
like 65-70% of them are exposed to quite a bit of evil.
Right, and see, that's the thing, it starts at home. I mean,
That's the problem.
it's, you need to, like, parents actually, like, it's way harder to be a parent nowadays because, like, you have to, like, you can't trust that PBS. I mean, look at Arthur.
Right.
Arthur,
So disappointing.
Mr. Ratburn has a
Yeah.
husband,
I don't even watch
Yeah.
Arthur anymore.
I never did, but I did.
So, I mean, that's the thing is that you've got,
Well, and you can't even trust like your kids' friends' parents that if they're over there playing at their house that they won't watch something or see something that you
But they're
object to.
integral.
right,
There used
exactly.
to be, most parents were
Are
kind
they
of on the
really?
same page, this is not appropriate for children. I had a second grader who went to a birthday party, and then mother decided to take them all to an R-rated movie. And this little second grader said, I need to call my mother. And the parent's like, why? She's like, because I know my mother wouldn't want me to watch that movie. And so at age 7, this little girl had to pick up the phone and call her mom and say, Mom, can you come pick me up because they're going to see this movie and I know you don't want me to see it. And then when her mother shows up, this other parent is like yelling at her mother, like, what's wrong with you? Why do you, it's fun, the kids will have fun. Just doesn't get it that it's not appropriate for a 7-year-old.
Right,
And that's what you're dealing with as a parent nowadays, with that kind of stuff.
right. And this is,
Yeah.
and this is why really, I mean, you
have to be very vigilant.
You do, and you need to find people who are like-minded, and
And that's where, once again, that's where the parochial school helps, because at least you know that most of the other parents of the kids in your child's class are on the same page as you.
yep,
There
and
might
you
be a couple in there that are, sending their kids there for other reasons, but at
and you
least
can
the
have those
majority-
conversations, right? So if something isn't like, if it's not clicking, I mean, at least then you can, you have some basis to talk with them about it, right? But yeah, I mean, this is the thing. There needs to be a worldview shift.
You heard this morning where in California, they want to make a law for not killing animals?
A no-kill state.
A no-kill
California.
state for
I
animals.
think Lifesite News put it out or something. California's governor is proposing making California a no-kill state for animals. How ironic is that? It's all full speed abortion,
Yeah.
but it's a no-kill state for animals.
Yeah.
That's just too,
So somebody posted on Facebook, if women had puppies, abortion would be illegal.
Exactly, the same, yeah, that's right, I've
That's-
seen that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's,
simple too.
It's the truth.
but, you know, that's the thing, is that, you know, we actually need, and this is where the creativity comes in, is that we actually need to create and sustain parallel institutions, right? Things like parochial schools, things like, you know, because, I mean, and you look at it too, I mean, when people want to get married, you know, I mean, a lot of people are marrying non-Christians. Well, what do you think that does to the raising of your kids? I mean, really, you know?
Nowadays, a lot of people don't even bother getting married.
Right, you know,
They just have kids and,
I was gonna say, when you said
whatever.
people wanna get married, I thought, who wants to get married? Oh, nobody
Yeah.
wants to, it seems like.
that's,
Only the gays.
Yeah, the gay one,
Yeah,
but
there you
no one
go.
else wants
Right.
to.
Right.
Well, and if they have children, why get married? Because they can get more money and more aid by being unwed. So there's, you know, they
Yeah.
get more help, they get money. So why get married? I'll lose that funding.
yeah, I know, it's, you know. So, yeah, it's funny because, you know, now with having internet TV, we get commercials again. And I hate it. But it's interesting because Bernie is, he's like, oh yeah, a woman's right to choose, but then, you know, free daycare for moms. And it's like, don't you think those two things are kind of, you know, at odds with one another,
Well,
maybe?
the free daycare is because they want to get them younger so they can indoctrinate them.
Right,
That's what that's all about. Back in the 70s, there was a big push by the NEA for there to be public preschool. You know why? Because they said, when we don't get them till kindergarten, their parents have already filled their heads with all of these notions about what's right and what's wrong, and we need to be able to fix that. So if we could get them when they're 3, then we can, you know, bring them up properly and they won't believe all of this crazy stuff.
Right.
And that, they were open about that. That was their goal, was to have public preschool, because 5 was too old for them to start indoctrinating them. Now they want to get them at 6 weeks.
right. No,
Okay.
and, because that's the thing, I mean, you know,
I think also it was under the disguise of kids aren't ready in kindergarten to
Right.
learn. And so
Right.
that's where,
Just what I
that's what parents heard.
Right.
Yeah.
But
And that's
that's
what they're
not
doing
what their
now,
goal
but-
was.
and that all goes back to John Dewey. This all goes back to the 1860s, where he said, I mean, he wanted public schools as a force for social change. Right? These thoughts have been around for a long, long time. And that's the thing, is that if they've been around for that long, right, and it's taken this long for them to develop, right? How long is it going to take to get it back? I mean, that's the thing. We got to be in it for the long haul, right? We got to be in it for the long haul, because it's going to take a long time for these things to get back. You know, so, and,
Doesn't it say in the Bible it's gonna get worse, not better?
right,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I don't know
So-
that we ever will take it back, but the church has to wake up and realize what's going on so that they can be the church militant and they can stand up against it.
yeah, well,
So,
and
you know.
I mean, I look at, you know, look at the early 1800s, right? 1803, when the Prussian Union was forced on Lutherans, right? The church was in a really bad spot. It was terrible. I mean, pastors were rationalists. They were preaching, they didn't believe Jesus was God. They, didn't believe in the miracles, right? So they had very practical sermons on how to plant potatoes and do your taxes and do that. I mean, that's what their sermons were about, And then you had the crazy pietists, on the other hand, who are like, well, if you can't tell me the day and the hour that you had this crisis, you're not a Christian. There's this one book that was written for communion by a guy by the name of Frenzius. And there were 11 different types of communicants. And only one of them could take communion. Okay? So, but out of that, you have the great Lutheran awakening, right? You have these guys like Wilhelm Leah, who sent missionaries over to the United States. You have C.F.W. Walther. You have Ludwig Harms. You have the Erlangen School. You have all these guys who, you have this flowering of Lutheranism that happens, right? And we're still living off of the fumes of that. The reason why conservative church bodies like the Missouri Synod and the Wisconsin Synod and the ELS and some of these others, the reason why they exist, why the Lutheran Church exists in America, in Australia, in South Africa, in all these other places, is because of what happened in the 1800s, right? And, it can happen again, right? Because even before that, look at before the Reformation. Things were pretty cruddy, right? Then you go back to the 10th century when you had government officials appointing pastors. It's called the investiture controversy. Go 500 years before that, you have the fall of Rome and all of these barbarians basically wiping out Christianity in England. And so it needed to be reconverted by the Irish, right? And so that's the thing. We don't know what God is going to do, right? He might do very, very amazing things here, right? Could very well be, right? But that's not our call.
He might be ready to pull the plug.
He might be ready to pull the plug, right? But what is our task? We don't look at the results, right? We are here to be faithful. That is the main goal, right? And if God wishes to do something with that, thanks be to God, right? It's in His freedom to do what He wishes with it. But, so that's the thing is I don't know, I vacillate a lot between, optimism and pessimism, which I think is probably the way it should be, because it is.
Either way, you still have to be faithful and do what God has called you to do.
Right,
Whether you get results or whether you don't, you don't have any control over that.
Right.
That's up to God. What you have control over is, are you serving as faithfully as you can?
Right. And I look at Samuel. The church was in a real rough state when Samuel was a judge, right? By the time but Samuel lays the foundation for not just Saul, but David and for Solomon, right? He provides this unity that Israel hadn't seen since the days of Joshua. So, we don't often see the fruit of our labors. But that's the way it's always been, right? I reap where I didn't sow. I haven't, most of the people that I've buried, I didn't baptize. I didn't catechize, And that's just the way it is. And that's okay, right? Because, hopefully there'll be another generation who will,
Well, Jesus says, one plants, one waters, one sows.
God gives the growth, right?
God gives the growth, So it's like you didn't baptize them, somebody else did.
Right,
Somebody else catechized them, but now you were there when they, needed a pastor at the end. You were there. That's the way it works.
I could spend 35 years here, right? 40 years here. And I still wouldn't reap more than likely what I sowed. And that's okay, right? Because that's not the point. We have to look at this not just one not just one family, that's too short-sighted, right? We have to look back throughout all of human history